Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new, very special episode of the Metal Meltdown. Welcome to the Metal Meltdown and Mad Mike's Heavy Metal Hall of Fame. I am Robert, Uncle Melty of the Metal Meltdown, and of course, I also have the maddest of Mikes, Mad Mike himself. How are you?
Mad Mike, more like Mid Mike.
Oh, shit. He's got jokes.
Shit.
Oh, shit.
Oh man. Yeah, I am doing great. Anyone who's watched me on here before probably notices a different background. I've basically just sold out. So
Shame on you.
Yeah, I know. So
Poser.
yeah. But yeah, speaking of selling out, we're doing this Hall of Fame thing, which is only for sellout bands, as
Of
we
course.
know.
Only the
Yeah.
cheapest and most hollow of bands end up in
Yeah.
our Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
But no, in all seriousness, this was something I kind of came up with. Mike kind of came up with it as well. I kind of
Yeah.
approached Mike because you did a community post about something like this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want to step on any toes. So is this like, were you just doing this to create conversation or just fucking around? Or is this something you legit want to do? And it was like a little bit of column A, column B. And that birthed this whole thing. This is partially in response to the Real Life Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which, as I've mentioned here on the Metal Meltdown a couple of times, is a somewhat out-of-touch organization with a heavy bias against heavy metal music specifically, but also, to be fair, progressive rock, jazz, punk rock. They cater primarily to popular forms of music, like a lot of hip-hop, which, fine, I'm not one of those white conservative fuddy-duddies that cares about hip-hop being in the Hall of Fame. But I do think it's a little fucked up that it took this long to get a Tribe Called Quest in the Hall of Fame, and it took Eminem no time whatsoever. You know what I mean? Like, Outkast still isn't in there either, and that's insane to me. Like, there's a generally, I feel like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame just does a really bad job at representing the genres that it tells us it's trying to represent, especially metal. So we've decided, fuck it, we're doing our own Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A heavy metal Hall of Fame. We're going to honor all the fucking bands that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame doesn't want to touch, might never touch, probably never will touch.
But Rob, metal bands aren't famous. You can't call it Hall of Fame. Anyways.
I should note, I should note for the sake of clarity, there is an actual official heavy metal Hall of Fame.
Oh, there is.
I believe there's, I'm blanking on the exact information. While I'm editing this, I can post a little thing on the screen. Wow, look at that. They're a nonprofit organization that operates out of California, but I would argue even they aren't doing the best of jobs. I have found, if you look them up, I found that when I looked them up, I found that they were doing a good job at inducting the B tier, C minus tier bands and a lot of hair metal and 80s rock. But like it still seemed like, I don't know, man, still kind of feels like we're catering to a specific type of metal. I don't know. It kind of feels like we're still kind of fucking it up a bit. So the goal for us today with me and Mad Mike is this is not about who our favorite bands are. This is not about who we think is the most popular or the hottest trending. We're looking at influence. Who sold the most records? Who pioneered all the best riffs and sounds and tones and techniques? We are looking at the bands that actually matter to the continued development and popularity and influence of heavy metal music.
Hell yeah. I'm down with that. But yeah.
Which means I don't want to hear none of y'all come in here going like, how come my favorite Norwegian band with only 100 listeners on Spotify isn't on here? You just answered your own question, dumbass. That's why.
For sure. Yeah. You'll get like a lot of people asking about, oh, where's Burzum? Like you'll get a lot of those, I'm sure. And
Burzum's not on here.
Oh yeah. Spoiler alert. Sorry.
No Nazis in the Hall of Fame. Or if you prefer Odinalus, if you really want to be politically correct in defending Varg of all people, sure, go for it. Anyways, we now that we've established what's happening with this, what this is, who's here, who should be here. Actually, we haven't done that. What I'm getting to, who should be here? Who would you consider worthy of the Metal Meltdown and Mad Mike's Heavy Metal Hall of Fame, I can think of two bands right off the bat who are without their specific influence, without records they made and choices they made, also visually, fashion, aesthetic, lyrics, without them, metal literally doesn't exist. Those two bands are Black Sabbath and Judas Priest. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I'm going to expand it a little bit. So our band limit would be around 10, I'm going to guess.
Yes. So yeah, in the first year that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted artists, they inducted 10 specifically. So I'd love to get at least 10.
Yeah. So like I got 5 right off the bat. And so Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Metallica, and Motorhead. Like if this was like if we only allowed one band in this class, it would be Black Sabbath for sure. Like because they pretty much invented the genre, right? So
I don't disagree with any of those choices. In fact, we kind of talked beforehand about locking those bands in.
Yeah.
But I want to zero in on Black Sabbath and Judas Priest specifically for a moment because between the two of these bands, they predate a lot of what we know of as metal music. Judas Priest establishes the fashion, the signature look of metal, falsetto vocals, dual twin guitars. Black Sabbath, even before Judas Priest, establishes the signature tone and feel of metal itself. The downtuned guitars, the apocalyptic lyrics, nihilistic lyrics, a lot of drugs and partying, the demented howlings of Ozzy Osbourne himself. Like between these two bands, the foundation of metal is created.
Yeah, like even Black Sabbath with imagery too. Like you open up I have the first album on vinyl. You open it up, it's a cross, a black cross. And like, of course, who can't think of metal without thinking of that iconic album cover of Black Sabbath's debut? Like with, that really dark, ominous looking figure with like something really old in the background.
Yeah, it's like an old abandoned house or mill or something like that. The whole thing looks like a Victorian painting. Like it just has this really like mournful gothic feel to it.
Yeah. And so they had a big hand in the imagery too. And same thing with Judas Priest too. Like, it also added another layer. They also added another layer to metal. So like, with Rob Halford, especially his vocal range, it expanded upon what metal can do vocally, especially because before that, Ozzy, great singer, not taking anything away from what he did, but his range wasn't Rob Halford's. It's like, I don't think anyone would say his range is like Rob Halford's.
Oh, no. No. I mean, yeah, it's one of those things that's not even up for debate. Like, you can argue if you prefer one over the other, fine, but Rob Halford has objectively bigger range. Like, he's got nearly a 5-octave voice. Like, that's fucking insane.
And
but yeah, and it's worth noting that as the decades roll on, Black Sabbath continues to get more progressive. Black Sabbath continues to have more and more mass appeal. Going into the 80s, they had Ronnie James Dio on lead vocals.
Oh, yeah.
With which, kind of going into more like that kind of territory that Dio would ironically have on his solo albums.
Yeah.
But, also bringing in that like mystical kind of otherworldly lyricism that Dio had with the Rainbow records. And Judas Priest especially. I mean, they went from being a 70s English rock band to, kind of being forerunners of the new wave of British heavy metal. And, records like Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith were kind of released right in the right at the peak of that movement as well. They go into like glam metal with like Turbo. They go into like thrash and speed metal with Painkiller. And Rob Halford, I mean, over the years, he continues to experiment with industrial and groove metal. Judas Priest does like a symphonic metal concept album with Nostradamus, which I didn't care for, but that's not really my argument. Like they've just continued to be icons. They've continued to change their sound and style and just they've really embraced everything that really is about metal.
Yeah. And they I'll comment as well. They're still putting out some good stuff, like what, 50 years into their career.
Yeah.
Like, Invincible Shield is actually a pretty strong album. I don't know why it surprised me, because like they still put out good stuff, but it was.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of Judas Priest is in their 70s.
Yeah.
I think Glenn Tipton is like 76 years old.
Yeah.
If they were to do another record in 4 or 5 years, he'd be 80, 81 years old. Like, that's
Yeah.
unfucking heard of.
Yeah. So yeah, 50 years into their career, and they're still, they're still putting out strong stuff. Rob Halford, like, I don't know what he's drinking, but it's working with his voice. He still sounds great. And obviously the influence they've had, like you said, over the music, the imagery, their fashion, like you can't even think of metal without thinking of, people wearing bullet belts or, studded armbands, like what Halford
Oh
did.
yeah, that kind of like leather daddy S&M biker
stuff.
look. Like,
yeah,
that is the signature metal fashion. I mean,
oh yeah,
there are variations. Like when you get to thrash metal, there's patches and like the curve, the hat with the brim flipped up and shit like that. But like, everything stems, metal fashion stems from what Judas Priest was doing and from what they were in turn pulling from like S&M clubs and leather daddy culture and shit like that.
Yeah.
They're fucking icons. But yeah, Black Sabbath and Judas Priest laid down the foundation for metal, which is why they are both immediately going in to our heavy metal Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned earlier Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Motorhead. We'll get to Metallica. Trust me, we're definitely getting to Metallica.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Iron Maiden and Motorhead for a minute as well, because they weren't some of the first metal bands, but they rank as some of the, I guess in a way they were, like some of the first big metal bands at least. What's exciting about these bands is that they take everything that these guys kind of established and other rock bands established in the 70s, and they just kind of take it to the next level.
Yeah.
Like Motorhead gets more punky and greasy and dirty with those like big thick bass lines and those double bass drums and those, Lemmy's like really gruff macho voice. He sounds like he's just smoked like 18 packs of cigarettes every fucking day. And Iron Maiden takes things into more like epic high concept territory with, lyrics pulled from like real historical events, Native American history, English history, and like ancient mythology and shit like that. And also more progressive songwriting as well, synthesizers and shit like that. They become arguably a prog metal band in the late 80s with records like Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. Your thoughts. You brought them up. I'm gonna let you ramble on for a bit.
All right. So first I'll mention Motorhead, because, well, first of all, Lemmy, the guy is a legend, and like, you respect how he came up in the business, because this guy started out as a roadie for Jimi Hendrix, first of all. And then he kind of works his way up from there, getting into Hawkwind. He put out some really good stuff in Hawkwind. And then, of course, Motorhead happens. And, even Lemmy would say that, that he even said that they were more of a punk band at the time, he felt. But I personally feel like they were punk, metal, rock, everything in between. And there was a lot of energy in their music. There was a lot of speed in their music, both literally and figuratively, right? And just considering their influence as well, I've heard David Ellefson say this. Motorhead was essentially the original thrash metal band, even though they weren't considered thrash. But a lot of what they did, the Megadeths, the Metallicas, the Anthraxes, the Slayers, the Testaments, like they kind of picked up on that. They perfected it and made it their own. But Motorhead pretty much lit the spark, was the spark that lit the flame for that one. So like, obviously, to me, just based on their influence on what came after them alone, Motorhead definitely belongs on this opening inductee list. for sure, and especially with iconic albums like Overkill, Ace of Spades, Bomber. The debut is still strong. Even later on, like Orgasmatron, that's a great album. And even later on in their career, I believe they still put out some strong stuff. Like you still have some really good singles later on, like God Was Never on Your Side, Rock Out, Whorehouse Blues. That's kind of it's a blues tune, but it's still a really fun song to jam out to. Yeah, they were another band like Judas Priest that continued for the most part to put out strong stuff up until the end of their career. So absolutely Motorhead does belong in the first class of this heavy metal Hall of Fame.
Lemmy Kilmister is also like just a cult icon in general. Like we could probably just induct Lemmy Kilmister by himself if we're being honest. Like he just has by himself, he just has that level of appeal and influence. Like he's just such a super fascinating and weird person. Like like when he was alive, you would always see him at the Rainbow Bar and Grill in LA. He'd always play with the electric slot machines. He'd always have a Jack and Coke, which has been dubbed the Lemmy once or twice over the years as a result. I remember going to see Scott Ian from Anthrax. He did like a speaking words tour here where he just told stories from his life. And he talked about Anthrax recording an album in the mid 90s, and Motorhead was recording an album, like, I think it was either nearby or down the street or something like that, close enough that they met up and hung out. And Lemmy was wearing these really revealing booty shorts, like these really tight, really revealing jean booty shorts. And Scott Ian's wearing like just shorts, like regular shorts. They're maybe a little bit past his knees because he's a shorter guy. And he's straight up just like, Lemmy, I can see your fucking balls, man. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, what you're wearing isn't shorts. These are shorts. Those are real pants. Man shorts.
Those are pants, you know?
Those are pants. These are shorts. It's just like, that is so fucking, like, he literally just had his fucking balls out just cuz. Just cuz. Why not? I'm Lemmy Kilmister. I can do what I want.
Yeah, like that dude, like there's, we talk about Giga Chads. There's Giga Chads, and then above that is Lemmy.
He had no shame. Oh, yeah. He had supreme levels of confidence. Yeah. I don't know a lot of straight men that could be rocking like really tight jean booty shorts. And like there's another story from the Ozzy Osbourne autobiography where Lemmy was just crashing at his house one day, and Lemmy would just lock himself away in a library and drink and smoke and just read for hours on end. And I'm like, that story makes him sound like a vampire. Like, what the fuck? That's so weird.
Yeah. Also, on the topic of Lemmy, I think he is a very, very strong lyricist as well. That's one thing that's like not as talked about with him. Of course, the guy's got innuendos for days. I mean, you think killed by death. If you squeeze my lizard, I'll put my snake on you. He's not talking about Chompy there.
That's definitely Chompy. What are you talking about?
But even like, because he wrote some songs for Ozzy on No More Tears, like Mama, I'm Coming Home. And even Ozzy was like surprised by how deep that song was. Like that's
still one of Ozzy's best solo cuts as well.
Yeah. So like he had a big hand in that. And also I'm mentioning Motorhead too, because we talk about Lemmy, but I do want to mention Filthy Animal Taylor, the drummer, because you listen to Overkill, the song, that drum part, that opening drum part, that like that basically laid the foundation for thrash drumming.
It's so fucking hype all these years later. Like it's just so good.
Yeah. It's such a simple beat nowadays, but at the time, nothing like that was really heard. And he basically wrote the blueprint for that.
All right. I've went ahead and added Motorhead and Iron Maiden to our list. Let's talk a little bit more about Iron Maiden. We geeked out about Motorhead for a bit. Iron Maiden are the true poster boys for the new wave of British heavy metal, which is where metal really explodes and reaches new horizons. I mean, there was tons of bands that came up in that scene. The aforementioned Motorhead, Black Sabbath and Judas Priest released some popular records in this time. More
Mm-hmm.
importantly, there was also Saxon, Angel Witch, Def Leppard,
Diamond
but
Head.
Diamond Head as well, yes.
Yeah.
And but the best and perhaps the most important in regards to metal is Iron Maiden. I mean, Killers, Number of the Beast, Power Slave. I'm forgetting what's the fucking
Peace
one.
of Mind.
Peace of Mind. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
These are there's some amazing songs on here.
Mm-hmm.
Like Die With Your Boots On, The Prisoner, The Number of the Beast, Murders in the Rue Morgue. There's so many amazing songs that are so catchy, so big, a lot of great technical performances and amazing, clean, crisp production. Like Iron Maiden was able to create really big metal songs that you could hear in an arena. Like they were an arena rock band essentially, but they still had that metal attitude and that ethos. And the fact that they were writing more progressive, high concept material too, especially as the decade raged on, I think it just goes to show metal could be a lot more than just, no disrespect to Lemmy, just drinking whiskey and playing filthy bass licks,
Oh yeah, for sure. And they based a lot of what they did on a lot of, books. I know books are the enemy on your channel. I know
books are so scary. I should be ashamed of myself for having them on my shelf.
For sure. But yeah, and their run of albums in the 80s from their self-titled debut up to and including Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is arguably the greatest run of albums that any band in metal has ever had.
It's extremely their worst album from that period is still a pretty solid 3.5 out of 5, probably.
Yeah.
I'm on record as saying that Power Slave is not my favorite of this era, but as I still recall saying and reviewing every Iron Maiden album, there's still some good songs on there. There's still some really good quality stuff.
For sure. You know what? The Power Slave is not my favorite album. Either. It's actually Somewhere in Time. Power Slave is my second favorite, but moving on, later on in the decade, what they did with their synth work was so influential to everything that happened after that, especially in power metal, especially in symphonic metal as well.
Progressive metal as well. I mean, there are people who would look to Seventh Son specifically as maybe one of the first progressive metal records.
Possibly, yeah, especially the title track and Infinite Dreams as well, those tracks. But yeah, it really goes without saying. I mean, Steve Harris, one of the greatest bass players of all time. Bruce Dickinson, arguably 1 and 1A with Rob Halford as, the greatest singers in the history of metal. Again, the twin guitar attack. I mean, I know it's 3 guitarists now with Yannick Gers, but Dave Murray, Adrian Smith, one of the greatest twin attacks of all time. I will argue that Clive Burr is just as important as a drummer as Nico was, especially you listen to them live now. Nico cannot play Clive's stuff that well. He never was really able to. And they both had a different impact on the band in their own ways. Clive Burr was very, very tight and very, very precise and still hit the drums. He could play fast and still kill the drums, especially on tracks like Run to the Hills, where I think that's his magnum opus.
For a while too, Iron Maiden was one of those bands that continued to still, as time went on, they just still sounded great. Like Brave New World, what was the one from 2003? The one that has the cringy CG cover.
Dance of Death.
Yes.
Yeah.
A Matter of Life of Death. The Final Frontier, the Book of Souls. I like Book of Souls. Shoot me. I'll concede Senjutsu. It's got issues. It's got some problems. But I still gave it a 3 out of 5, and I still stand by that. It's got some strong moments. They've aged pretty well for the most part. And they continue to be a massive band. They continue to sell out stadiums and tour the world, and they continue to be arguably one of the most important metal bands.
Absolutely, for sure. And I am going to disagree a little bit. I don't think like the last two albums, especially, I just like, I listen to them and I feel like a tired old man by the end of it. Like, so I can't imagine, like, it's almost like it feels tired when I listen to it. So it's like, I don't know. I feel
we
like
should note that the fans, at least, let's put it, the fans enjoy the music, the new music enough that Iron Maiden can go on tour supporting these albums, and they can play most of these albums and fans don't object. That's unheard of.
Yeah, I actually remember I saw them on the Final Frontier tour and they played nothing but stuff from their 2000s albums. So
I saw
Brave
them
New
on
World
when
and
I saw them on the Book of Souls tour. They were playing they played basically half that album and then basically some of their biggest hits after all that. And the crowd was loving every second of it.
yeah.
So I mean, we can debate on the quality of the music, and Lord knows people in the comments will. But the fact remains, like the
Oh
general
yeah.
consensus is they've stayed pretty good to the
Oh
point.
yeah.
Like I can't imagine, like I if Ozzy were out touring right now, I can't imagine him playing music mostly from the last two albums. I can picture him playing music, one or two songs from Patient Number 9, and then the rest would be the '80s classics. And I
For
know
sure.
this because when I saw Ozzy in 2010, his album Scream, which came out at the time, he played like one, two songs from that album, and the rest was all like the big hits:
The
Crazy
greatest
Train,
hits tour, yeah.
Diary of a Madman, Mama, I'm Coming Home, Bark at the
Bark at the Moon,
Moon.
yep. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like and just based on their influence on the scene, you listen to a power metal band now, it's like there's Iron Maiden all over them.
Power
Right? Like
Maiden, power metal owes its entire existence to Iron Maiden.
pretty much, yeah.
So much so that I
So
accidentally said Power Maiden.
Power Maiden, yeah. Yeah, that's the actual genre's name, right? So yeah, like I don't think there's much more that needs to be said. Iron Maiden, like one of the greatest metal bands of all time, one of the most influential metal bands of all time. And they are also proof that you could become one of the biggest bands in history without a lot of mainstream coverage as well. Like you, in the eyes of the mainstream, they're almost like a one-hit wonder if you really think about it. Run to the Hills, like, because you talk to any casual, they're gonna think, oh, that's the band that played Run to the Hills, right? And like there's not much else is really
I don't
talked
know.
about.
Iron Maiden in general, like they're big within metal, but I
Yeah,
understand what you're saying though. They're niche overall within
yeah,
the realms of rock, but I mean
yeah.
they still have like pretty broad appeal.
Oh yeah, for
I don't
sure.
know. Will say I'll fight you on that one hit wonder per thing because I have yet to meet anyone who would argue Iron Maiden is a one hit wonder band.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying they are. It's just like in the eyes of like, say, your grandma or like,
My
Johnny
grandma's
Average.
dead, and she didn't listen
Oh,
to Iron Maiden.
oof,
She
my
listened to
bad.
Newfie folk music and Johnny Cash.
Oof. Um, yeah, I think it would be like in the eyes of like Johnny Average, your average Joe, it would be, oh, they're that band that played Run to the Hills. And maybe they'll like remember the Trooper a little bit, but like,
You are right in the sense that Iron Maiden don't have the instant recognition that Ozzy Osbourne and Metallica might have.
yeah, yeah, like,
Although speaking of, this is actually a great opportunity to move on to the fifth band we mentioned earlier,
yeah.
Metallica. And I know for a fact there's going to be a little bit of pushback on this. But here's the thing. I don't care if you think Metallica are overrated, and I don't care if you hate the Black Album and everything that came after it. It doesn't change the fact that Metallica is the definitive metal band.
Yes.
You ask any random person on the street to name a metal band, they're naming Metallica. If not
Yeah.
first, definitely shortly after. I type
Yeah.
in metal on Google, what's one of the first things to pop up? Literally a piece of metal and then Metallica.
Yeah, for
And
sure. Like,
like, if we're talking about perfect album runs, then Kill 'Em all the way up to Black Album, is truly perfect. And I'm
yeah.
including Black Album because that album fucks, and I don't care if you
Oh
disagree.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like on your point of like them being the definitive metal band, like yeah, like I was talking to someone at Sonic Boom when I visited Toronto. He looked exactly like you. It was kind of weird. But like I was talking about, because I'm a wrestling fan, and I said they are basically metal's Hulk Hogan. Like you talk to anyone who doesn't know wrestling at all, they will be able to name Hulk Hogan. You talk to someone who doesn't know metal at all, they'll still be able to name Metallica. They are that household name. You know what I mean?
They're inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They've won Grammy Awards. They're a multi-platinum band. The Black Album is one of the best-selling albums of all time, and probably the best-selling metal album of all time overall. By this point, it still sells approximately 5,000 copies every single week. And it's not just money and numbers. Their influence is widespread. I mean, Kill 'Em All and demos that came before it, and a lot of stuff they were doing back in the day, that paves the way for thrash metal. Yes, there were other bands happening at that same time.
Yes.
But, you know, a lot of metalheads use this. Well, what about X band? What about Y band? Great for them. You can't, it works both ways, bro. You can't do that shit.
Yeah.
Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets introduces more intricate songwriting to the thrash metal sound, better production, and Justice for All especially gets into very technical territory. And I'm going to make a bold argument. There's a lot of stuff that happens specifically in technical death metal in regards to production that stems from Injustice for All.
Oh yeah, the way drums are produced, like especially nowadays, took a lot of, you know, how Lars's drums sound on Justice. Like that very clicky bass drum that you hear on Injustice for All, like that.
That's all throughout tech death nowadays.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like you listen to Archspire and it's like it's got that same, almost that same kind of drum sound to it, right? And yeah, like I'll talk about the Black Album too. Like that is, you know, based on that alone in terms of popularity, I believe that it's some kind of record where like when Nielsen started tracking album sales, it's like one of the top 5 albums in terms of sales ever. Like, and the other ones are like, you know, Bob Marley greatest hits. I can't remember, Dark Side of the Moon. So the Black Album is essentially up there with Dark Side of the freaking Moon. Like, so in terms of popularity and how, you know, long it's been on whatever chart, right?
And I know a lot of metal elitists and thrash metal heads and old people love to bitch and moan. Metallica cut their hair. They changed their sound. Whether you like it or not, there are a lot of people who genuinely like Load and Reload and Saint Anger and Death Magnetic.
Yeah.
And also, these albums broaden Metallica's appeal. And also, they still sold millions and millions and millions of records. I'll go as far as to defend more recent records, well, recent in quotation marks in regards to Hardwired to Self-Destruct, but I liked Hardwired to Self-Destruct, and I honestly liked 72 Seasons. And Metallica is still finding all kinds of new and exciting ways to reach out to people. Using Master of Puppets and Stranger Things introduced an entire new generation of kids to Metallica, and you can love it, you can hate it, I don't care. It's just what happened. There's no point arguing about it. Gatekeeping Metallica is a waste of fucking time. Why are you bothering?
Yeah, I mentioned a lot of that in my Black Album video a long time ago. Like it's, you know what? If you're still pissed off about the Black Album, it's
been over 30 years.
33 years.
Let it go.
Like just let it go.
If you want to listen only to Kill 'Em All, good for you. Go for it. But quit your fucking bitching.
Yeah. But like, even, you know, putting that out of the way, it does not, like, regardless of what you want to think about Metallica, you know, post 91 onwards from like Load to 72 Seasons, they still went on a 5-album run, which is, you know, maybe just under Iron Maiden as far as like one of the greatest run of albums of all time in metal.
If somebody looked at me and they said that those 5 albums were not at all important or influential to metal music, or at bare minimum to thrash metal music, I would not take them seriously. I would laugh directly in their fucking face. Like, you're lying to yourself. Period. You're full of shit. What next? You're going to tell me the Beatles didn't do anything to to inspire rock and roll in the 60s. Like, come on. Like, I get it. They're big, they're overrated, they're mainstream. We love to hate. Metalheads love to hate what's big and popular. I get it. But shut the fuck up. Just stop. Like, so that's why Metallica is going in the Metal Meltdown and Mad Mike's Heavy Metal Hall of Fame. Suck my fucking dick and balls if you don't like it.
the Metal Mike Down Hall of Fame.
The Metal Mike Down.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, of course, there were other bands at the time, too. Not taking anything away from them, but Metallica is effing Metallica. You know,
one of the big four of American thrash metal, pioneers, icons of 80s metal. They remain one of the biggest bands of all time. Literally, they sell more tickets than the Rolling fucking Stones. They're icons, and without them, metal is fundamentally different. And if you even attempt to argue otherwise, you are a completely unserious person.
Exactly.
All right, we've got our Mount Rushmore of sorts of Metal Meltdown Hall of Fame heavy metal Mad Mike bands. My brain is getting scrambled.
Oh yeah,
this is why I edit videos. I stutter and I trip on words. We've got our 5 bands. Yeah. Who else should we add to this little clip? Who else is getting in there? Who else? I'd like to pass this to you. Who do you think should go in?
Okay, so actually, let me take a quick drink here because I'm gonna try to make my case strongly here.
Oh God, Pepsi advertisement! He's sold out.
Drink Diet Pepsi.
He's sold out.
Aspartame gives you diabetes quicker. But anyways, no.
Fucking sellout. Unbelievable. Worse than the Black Album.
Damn right. Oh yeah. Hey, that when I made that video, it's like you're an automatic sellout. But okay. Anyway, so the next one on my list anyway, I got my list right in front of me. And the one I wrote after Metallica is Death. And I don't think much needs to be said here. I mean, Chuck Schuldiner, arguably the greatest guitarist metal has ever seen overall. You know, if not at least top 5 ever. Their run of albums too, you know, from Scream Bloody Gore to Leprosy, Spiritual Healing, Human, Individual Thought Patterns, Symbolic, Sound of Perseverance. They are all iconic death metal records. You know, we talk about how thrash metal just wouldn't be thrash metal without Metallica or even Motorhead. Well, death metal would not be death metal without Death and Chuck Schuldiner, because not only were they a big influence on, say, you know, brutal death metal, especially with Scream Bloody Gore,
and like technical and progressive death metal with later albums as well.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, you cannot, you know, the same way you can't talk about metal in general without mentioning Black Sabbath or Metallica or those 5 bands, you can't talk about death metal without mentioning the subgenre itself is named after them. Like, so I don't know what else needs to be said to make that.
I think I'm right there with you. I mean, when we talk about not even just death metal, but extreme metal as a whole and all these grindcore black metal, Death is one of those bands at the tippy top that is just so important and so influential all these years later. With throughout their discography, they're constantly reinventing their sound. They're going from like that kind of like old school primal death metal sound on Scream Bloody Gore and on demos before that as well. And they're getting more technical and more progressive over the years. By the time we get to Sound of Perseverance, Chuck's entire vocal style has changed and he's writing different kinds of songs. He continues to expand his horizons in Control Denied as well, which I'm not as big of a fan of, but there's a lot to appreciate about those records. And yeah, I mean, there's tons of big death metal bands we could talk about and probably still will. Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, Suffocation, Obituary, Autopsy. But without Death, the rest of these bands are almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, and I mean, we could even talk about Possessed, who Chuck Schuldiner himself would argue is the first true death metal band. But Possessed just don't have that same level of mass appeal and influence that Death had. And Possessed
Yeah.
were also like a kind of a hot little flash in the pan. Like
Yeah, they were kind of like
they did a
Venom.
reunion album a couple years ago, and they've done nothing
Yeah.
else since.
Yeah, they were Possessed was more like a Venom. They were there at the beginning of like the movement, but then just kind of faded out.
Mm-hmm.
Like very like it was they came and went like almost the same day, pretty much. So
And
like,
I mean,
yeah,
speaking of Venom, I mean that's a case. It's a case where I Venom might have paved the way for black metal, but I don't feel there's anything they did that is more important to black metal than what Mayhem or Enslaved or Emperor or Celtic Frost did. And
yeah,
same thing with Possessed and Death. Like I don't feel there's anything that Possessed did personally that is more important to the genre than specifically the Death discography.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm cool with writing their name already
I'm
because
good.
like,
I'm
oh
putting
yeah,
Death on the list.
yeah, and
Let's go.
Scream Bloody Gore. Funny enough, that's actually my favorite album from them. Not taking anything away from the other ones, but yeah, Scream Bloody Gore is just 10 songs of pure sonic assault.
And
Like,
while I have this little clip, while I have this whiteboard, I'm going to go ahead and write another name here on the list.
oh,
I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it because I really don't feel there's going to be any objection. We're still going to discuss it because we're adults, but I got a real funny feeling there's not going to be objection. So I'm sure you're all aware of a man by the name of Ronnie James Dio.
mm-hmm.
He was the lead singer for Black Sabbath after Ozzy. He was the lead singer for Rainbow briefly in the 70s. He also had his own band called Dio. Ronnie James Dio is an immensely influential figure. However, I will argue that Ronnie James Dio, the man, is more important to metal than his collective discography is more important than any of the individual bands like Rainbow and Dio. I am not saying they are not important. I am saying his collective discography is most important. Dio the man is more important, which is why I am not writing in Dio or Rainbow. Instead, I am acknowledging both and all other works made by Ronnie James Dio by simply writing him in as Ronnie James Dio. Kaboom jams. Right there.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because like I had a list of like 20 bands here, and I mentioned Black Sabbath and Rainbow as well, like because his stuff in Rainbow, like Rainbow Rising, and Long Live Rock and Roll. You can argue
amazing run of records.
Oh yeah, and his vocal work on that is so awesome. Like you can argue that power metal, like it wasn't power metal exactly, but it was definitely.
I would make an argument for Rising, especially being like, I guess the term would be proto power metal.
Yeah.
Between the lyrics have a lot of fantasy influence. They're very otherworldly. A lot of like nerdy talk of wizards and witches and all kinds of shit. And it's also just Ronnie's vocals and the very like fantastical kind of progressive guitar work, especially from Richie Blackmore. And this kind of helps to form the basis of the core Dio sound, along with what Dio would do with Black Sabbath on Heaven and Hell and The Mob Rules. And then that goes to Dio the band with Holy Diver, The Last in Line, and a bunch of other records. He also does Heaven and Hell later on in 2007 with the other Black Sabbath guys, which is basically Black Sabbath 2.0, but leaning full on into doom metal. And I love all these bands, but I feel like just acknowledging Ronnie James Dio, the man, is more fitting than inducting each individual band. Like we can summarize everything he's done just by putting his name right here.
Absolutely, and like and we talk about like imagery, and what's one of the first things you think of when you think of metal?
The metal horns.
The horns.
He gave us that.
Yeah, and it's obviously it's he didn't invent it, but like it's based off of like a old, because he's Italian American, and it's based off like an old Italian superstition from out in Italy. They're hyper religious, and he just decided, you know what, I'm going to use this, and I'm going to point to the crowd and be like, this is the evil eye. I'm giving you the evil eye. That's what it basically was, right? And then it just kind of became its own thing. And then Gene Simmons took credit for it, but
because of course he did. He's Gene Simmons.
Yeah. You want to listen? You want some good comedy? Just listen to Ronnie James Dio talk about Gene Simmons, because it's like he's just like, oh yeah, Gene Simmons will claim he invented this, but he also invented breathing and he invented shoes and stuff like that. Like it's just
it really wouldn't shock me if Gene Simmons actually claimed he invented those things. It really, honestly, I'm shocked he hasn't talked about like black metal and like bands like Ghost and shit like that and been like, actually they stole from us.
Oh my God. Yeah. So
I'm really shocked he hasn't done that.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, like just based on the devil horns alone, you could argue that he's on this first class. So yeah,
he's also one of the greatest metal singers of all time. I feel like that just needs to be said outright. Like he is up there with Rob Halford and Bruce Dickinson.
Yeah.
In terms of his range and just the overall, like, I mean, one of the most heavily imitated metal vocalists ever alongside those two.
For sure. And like, okay, so I got my list here of 10 bands. He was not on there. I will gladly take the L on that one. Oops. Mad Mike made an oopsie on
you had Rainbow, so it's all good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
And this is no disrespect to Rainbow.
And Black Sabbath too.
And you know what? If somebody in the comments were to make a genuinely compelling case for Rainbow being up here, I'm willing to hear him out. In fact, folks, if you probably already have done that, but feel free to tell us. This is a great time to remind you to tell us what you think should be on this list, because who knows, maybe we'll have to do a part 2 the next time there's a Hall of Fame related event, or maybe we'll just do it for shits and giggles.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. If point being, if someone's willing to make a compelling case for specifically Rainbow the band or Dio the band being in here, I'm willing to hear it. But for the time being, I think we can just brilliantly summarize everything great about Ronnie James Dio by just inducting him and all of his works as Ronnie James Dio.
Yeah, absolutely. No argument here. R.I.P. Ronnie. It's been 14 years now? Damn.
Something like that,
But yeah, so, gone, but definitely not forgotten. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right. There's one other kind of like, there's tons of bands we can talk about, but there's one like individual I would like to kind of throw out there for nomination that I also did not see on your list. Legendary shock rock icon, Alice Cooper.
Oh, yeah.
Alice Cooper, there's a debate as to whether or not we can consider his music sonically metal, but there's a lot that's metal about Alice Cooper. I would personally consider Alice Cooper metal. And the visual side of the visual element of what he does is so supremely important to metal as well. Like the heavy makeup, all the stunts he would perform on stage, decapitating people, and like all the weird costume changes, the shock rock, like it took glam and it turned it on its fucking head. It made it weird and freaky. I mean, years ago, he became known as a guy that like murdered chickens at a concert. Like he just did all kinds of shit,
Yeah.
And he also has made some very influential records and a lot of big hit songs, and he is kind of a poster boy for metal and for rock music as a whole. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
Oh man, I will take the L on that one as well. I think it's actually because like I don't really consider him musically anyway to be like a metal artist, but in terms of imagery, in terms of live performances, absolutely I can see his influence there. Like nowadays you go to a Ghost show or you go to a Rammstein show, and a lot of what they do live is aped off of what Cooper was doing 50 years earlier,
and
right?
if we're being very honest, sonically speaking, what Alice Cooper was doing in the 70s isn't far off from what Judas Priest were initially doing.
Yeah, kinda. Yeah,
and even what Black Sabbath were doing in the late 70s with Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die.
Yeah, and you think about that like metal, like the metal rebellion thing. Like, how can you think about that and not think about Schools Out, right? So
I mean, yeah, like what kid didn't sing Schools Out at some fucking point? Honestly,
And you were talking about earlier about Lemmy wearing the hot pants and getting away with it. Alice Cooper sang "Welcome to My Nightmare" on the freaking Muppets show once. I don't know if you've ever seen that clip, but
Pretty excellent,
oh
yeah.
yeah, and like
And the like little like the Sam Eagle Muppet who's like hyper patriotic is like, oh, he literally gets his feathers ruffled.
oh yeah,
Literally.
that's like one of the most iconic moments by like say a metal artist like being featured on the freaking Muppets of all shows, right? So yeah,
And
I will
there are a
argue.
lot of people that would cite Alice Cooper as being as important, not just to metal, but to rock music as a whole, as the likes of Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest.
Yeah, for sure. Even in terms of like his image itself, like you could argue that the corpse paint that a lot of black metal musicians do. I mean, obviously Kiss has an influence there too, but like it's I do think Alice Cooper had a hand in that as well. Um, but
So
yeah,
shall I go ahead and are we in agreement on Alice Cooper then?
man, there's it's I'm looking at my list right now and I'm like, do I put them in? Do I put them in over? Put him in over them? Do I put him in over this band? Because I'm just thinking because we mentioned Metallica, and there's a certain former member of Metallica that I don't think we can leave off this list, right? So
And I mean, we got plenty of room on this
yeah,
whiteboard. Plus, this isn't definitive. We can always
yeah,
come back and change it at the end of the video, move things around.
oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, I'd say what he wasn't on my list. I'll take the L there. But yeah,
All
Alice
right.
Cooper for sure. Yeah.
I am going to go ahead and add Alice Cooper to this list then. Congratulations, Mr. Cooper. And
Yeah.
you mentioned a certain former member of Metallica.
Yeah.
What former member in question?
A guy who wrote the first 5 albums of Metallica. Actually, no, I'm kidding. Dave Mustaine.
I mean, according to him, he probably
Yeah,
did.
yeah. So, and more importantly, Megadeth. So basically, I mean, Megadeth and Dave Mustaine are synonymous with each other. So, like, but we talk about metal guitar playing. Obviously, Tony Iommi's up there. James Hetfield is up there. Chuck Schuldiner is up there. We can't have a heavy metal Hall of Fame first class without mentioning arguably the greatest, all around guitar player, both riffing and soloing and everything in between that
Marty
metal's ever
Friedman.
seen. That
I mean, same band.
Plot twist. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, Dave Mustaine for sure. Not as a solo guy, but like definitely as part of Megadeth. Like even in terms of iconic albums too, they had a good album run. I mean, you had Peace Sells, So Far So Good So What, Rust in Peace, arguably the greatest thrash metal record ever.
I mean, that's one of my favorite metal albums of all time.
Yeah. And then they
and
had
I think Countdown to Extinction is an amazing record. An amazing record as well.
And they had their own Black Album there with Countdown, which was a very big hit for its time. Dave Mustaine infamously salty that it was number 2 behind Achy Breaky Heart, but like
I would think that I would wear that like a badge of honor. I think that'd be pretty fucking awesome, to be honest with you. All through the 90s too, like continues to have big hit songs like Atula Mon, Train of Consequences, She Wolf. I mean, we stumble a little bit as we get into the late 90s and 2000s. Risk, The World Needs a Hero, The System Has Failed. But then we kind of get like a little second renaissance with United Abominations and Endgame, and then we dip again with 13 and Super Collider. And then I didn't care for Dystopia, but hey, they won a Grammy. I'm in the minority. I understand that. I accept that. They've been all over the place, but Megadeth remain extremely popular, extremely successful,
extremely influential.
And they have a very unique thrash sound. I would argue maybe the most unique of all of the bands in the Big Four, especially. He has this weird, like, snarling, almost like goblin-esque vocal tone. He pulls a lot of influence from world politics, religion, conspiracy theories, and mean sometimes it reads as angry Fox News watcher as esque bullshit. Sometimes he kind of sounds like Alex Jones a bit too much for my liking. But
Yeah.
it does nonetheless add dimension and depth to his music that maybe the likes of Slayer and Exodus didn't necessarily have at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And like, of course, you listen to Rust in Peace, especially like we talk about technical thrash in the 90s, from bands like, say, Artillery or someone like that. Like a lot of the more technical side of metal takes a lot off of Rust in Peace.
I mean, even like going into like the 2010s with like kind of the thrash metal resurgence, and there's stuff from Havoc, early Revocation, Vector that wouldn't have been out of place on a late 80s, early 90s Megadeth record.
Absolutely, yeah.
In fact, Marty Friedman actually said this of Revocation specifically. If he were to have stuck around with Megadeth and if he had had it his way in Megadeth, he would have wanted to have been a band more like Revocation. Like he feels like Revocation is the logical evolution of Megadeth.
Yeah. Like, and this is another thing too. I know a lot of people complain about, like, they say Dave Mustaine's vocals are the weakest part. In a vacuum, I would agree, but as part of the whole of Megadeth, like it just fits. Mm-hmm. Like it's a very snarly, nasty voice.
It has character. It's unique. He's able to communicate his ideas clearly.
Yeah.
He as a vocalist, he probably, if he were making pop music or country music instead of like thrash metal, politically charged technical thrash metal, probably wouldn't work. Megadeth probably would have flopped a long, long time ago real quickly. But within the confines of this genre, his voice is more than appropriate for what he's doing.
Absolutely, yeah. It
sounds like we're in agreement, so I'm going to go ahead and just add Megadeth.
No problem adding Megadeth. So
what are we up to? I have 9? A question for you then. We have half of the big four on our Hall of Fame list. Do we want to consider the other half, Slayer and Anthrax?
This is
because I will argue that we should. Specifically, I will argue for the inclusion of Slayer.
See, if we were limiting it to 10 bands, then I would keep Slayer off. Slayer is absolutely a heavy metal Hall of Fame inductee. I just don't think I would put them above, say, so the other bands I have on my list are Opeth, Cannibal Corpse, and Deep Purple.
I would argue Slayer are way more influential than Opeth and Cannibal Corpse. I don't think it's even close, to be honest.
I'm thinking taking Opeth off and actually putting Dio on there because I don't know why I forgot that one. But
because think of it this way. Slayer is the nasty older brother that Metallica and Megadeth had. Slayer is more extreme, more volatile, more visceral, more in your face, and that has had a profound impact on metal culture. Not just music, but metal culture. You scream Slayer in public, you're at a metal show, you're guaranteed to get someone screaming it back, Like they have that impact and that legacy. They are also one of the most controversial metal bands of all time purely because of their sound. But also, they released an album called God Hates Us All on 9/11.
Yeah.
And that was purely by accident. What an insane accident to happen.
Yeah. And
there is literally an entire generation of thrash metal bands, of metal bands in general, that worship the ground Slayer stands on. In fact, I would make the argument Slayer's probably even more influential than Megadeth. I would personally make that argument.
If we were inducting just Dave Lombardo, it would absolutely.
And there's another good point. Dave Lombardo, his style of percussion, massively instrumental to the development of thrash metal and to extreme metal as a whole.
Yeah. The thing with me is just I look at the music and I love Rain and Blood. Love Seasons in the Abyss. South of Heaven is like kind of underrated a little bit in comparison to those two. And I think about Show No Mercy and Hell Awaits. I think Haunting the Chapel, that EP that came out, is better than those two. That especially for Slayer's earlier era. But after that, I just felt like they hit a wall creatively, and I felt like they just were not putting out the same type of quality material that they were, like, especially like in that, from 86 to 90 the run they had.
But counterpoint, as we detailed with Metallica, it doesn't matter what they put out after the classic material. Doesn't change the fact that the classic material is still the classic material.
Yeah, that's
and
a good
it is
point.
Worth noting that there are plenty of people who will happily defend God Hates Us All and Christ Illusion and even World Painted Blood and Repentless.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd be willing to sit here and argue that Diabolus in Musica is a way overhated album.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, I really respect what they went for on that album. I just didn't think it quite worked, especially like, what nu metal was doing was better than what was on Diabolus, basically.
Honestly, I never even really saw it as a nu metal record. I just saw it as like a groove metal record, honestly.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to think of like, again, I love Slayer, love them, obviously they've made some of my favorite albums of all time. Dave Lombardo, arguably the greatest drummer in metal's history, especially thrash metal for sure. But I'm just thinking, do I put them in, above? Because right now I got Cannibal Corpse and Deep Purple left. Do I put them in above Cannibal Corpse? Because I think, like, okay, here's like an argument for Slayer. I think they did have an influence on death metal for sure.
Oh, profoundly so.
Yeah. But I think it's like their influence on death metal is obvious, but I think it's a little overstated. I mean, you think a lot of death metal bands will cite Metallica and Megadeth as influences as well, like from that time period.
Of course, because that's the music they were probably listening to when they were putting their bands together.
And Celtic Frost and, like those early black metal bands. And I'm thinking, like, in just terms of consistency too, I'm like, like Slayer had a good run, but like Cannibal Corpse still puts out banger after banger after banger after banger, like some 35 years ish into their career. So I'm just thinking, like, do I put them in above?
But that's ultimately Cannibal? A matter of opinion.
Yeah.
As we said in the beginning, our opinions don't matter.
For sure.
It's all about influence. And I mean, if you feel so strongly that they can't be on here, I won't write them down. But I will happily argue that Slayer is a more influential band than Cannibal Corpse and Opeth, and even more so than some of the bands that might already be on this list.
Can we extend this to 12?
Of course we can.
Okay.
I just said 10 for a minimum.
Okay. Yeah, because so
I've converted him. I've done it.
Yeah.
Slayer.
Yeah. Slayer, for what? Sure, yeah.
Since you went ahead and mentioned Cannibal Corpse, and I won't argue on Cannibal Corpse, I'm just going to go ahead and write them on, and then we can just get into discussing why they deserve to be here.
Well, they are basically the Metallica of death metal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course, Death had the bigger impact and made the better records for sure. But in terms of popularity, in terms of recognition, in terms of, influence as well, especially on brutal death metal, like you could even argue that they're a brutal death metal band at their core. You can't mention death metal without mentioning Cannibal Corpse. They are the face of the genre.
They're the band that introduced the extremely violent lyrics. Mm-hmm. They're the band that introduced the gore. Yeah. And even if they weren't the first death metal band, they were probably still like in many ways the most influential because of their lyrics, because of their artwork, because of how much more pummeling their music was in comparison to say Morbid Angel, who are writing more intricate, dare I even argue, progressive music with more like archaic lyrics. Whereas Cannibal Corpse was just like fucked with a knife. I come blood, you know, like very straightforward, very in your face, very brutal, very provocative. And I mean, this got to the point where Cannibal Corpse were considered a threat to national security by presidential candidate Bob Dole. He was on stage and he talked about Cannibal Corpse along with the Ghetto Boys and Two Live Crew and other acts as being toxic, poisonous to the health of the youth of the nation of America.
Yeah, and like, you know what, we meme about Chris Barnes all the time, but I will.
Oh, we absolutely do.
I will, and
we'll be doing so again in just a couple of weeks because I got that 6 Feet Under promo.
Oh boy! But I will give credit where credit is due. His interview defending the band against Bob Dole was an absolute just W. Like, he's just like, Bob Dole's killing his whole campaign by attacking freedom of speech. And like, you know what?
Very rare Chris Barnes W with that.
For sure. Yeah. So
and I mean Corpse Grinder as well. The dude's he's an icon in and of himself. The dude's a total cinnamon roll.
Oh yeah, arguably the biggest teddy bear in death metal. Well, not even arguably, he is. And you know what? And I'm going to argue that when he replaced Barnes, it was the absolute right decision, and it's turned out to be the right decision. And, you know, he added another dynamic layer to the band because he can go oh my God, he can go ho. He can go low, he can go high, he can go in between. Like, he has so much more range, and it just like adds more to the arsenal of what Cannibal Corpse can do, right? But it doesn't take away from their 4, albums with Barnes. I mean, Tomb of the Mutilated, the album cover alone, like, you can induct Cannibal Corpse based on that album cover alone.
Honestly, I feel that.
And that's another one too. Vince Locke, like, their artist for sure.
He works pretty much exclusively with Cannibal Corpse too. Like, he is as instrumental to who they are as the Cannibal Corpse discography is.
Absolutely, for sure. And even last year with was it Violence Unimagined, or
that was I forget what the title exactly of it was, but it was a solid record.
They still put out banger after banger after banger, and still stay on top of their game, and still give us some great songs, great albums. Chaos Horrific, that's what it was last year, and that was on my top 10. We all had brain farts now and then. I've had at least 5 this episode. Oh yeah. But Torture, Wretched Spawn, still iconic records for me anyway. And in terms of influence and impact alone, I would absolutely put Cannibal Corpse on this list. So
now there's another band another kind of extreme metal band. We've kind of mentioned them here and there throughout this video. I'd like to officially float their name for induction here. Celtic Frost.
Ooh.
Pioneers, true pioneers of black metal, death metal, and even avant-garde metal. So much of what they do is so important to the foundation of various subgenres of extreme metal. Even if they aren't as massive as Black Sabbath, Metallica, or even Cannibal Corpse, they've nonetheless had profound influence.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, a lot of, again, I'm not the biggest fan, but as you say, the opinions don't matter. But again, you think about To Make a Therion, that's a pretty strong album for its time, pretty influential. I'm looking at the list you have on that whiteboard, and I'm looking at mine, and I'm like, because the only band I have left here that hasn't been mentioned is Deep Purple, and I'm like, Celtic Frost, I'm like, do I put them above Deep Purple? Because do we even consider Deep Purple to be a metal band?
So I would make the argument that Deep Purple, while influential to metal, is not a metal band. Deep Purple, more so than Alice Cooper and Black Sabbath, have really tried to distance themselves from being called metal. And I think it's more
Yeah.
so really just about like songs like Highway Star and Deep Purple and Richie Blackmore's like guitar playing that again
Yeah.
very influential. But because Deep Purple like just they're not sonically as heavy as even Alice Cooper or Black Sabbath, and they've worked so hard to distance themselves from the label. So I don't know if
Yeah.
I personally feel that.
Yeah, like it feels like, would you say they're in that like vein with like say Russian Van Halen, where it's like they're heavily influential, just not the thing, like just
Ye-
not metal.
For
Like,
Rush, absolutely. I
yeah.
would maybe be willing to hear an argument for Van Halen, even if just because of Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing, which
Oh
so
yeah.
many metal guitarists worship.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like Van Halen, like just based on their debut alone, like that is a masterclass in guitar playing. Both, and this is the thing that's like not talked about in terms of Eddie Van Halen, like his riffing. They talk
Mhm.
about his soloing all the time. You know, everyone talks about Eruption, but like say the main riff to Panama, the main riff to, you know, Running with the Devil, or Ain't Talking About Love, or even like, I know this is a cover, but You Really Got Me. Like this,
Mhm.
the guy's riff work is absolutely
David Lee
phenomenal.
Roth is an extremely dynamic singer as well.
Yeah.
They continued to have a lot. I'm not a huge fan of the Sammy Hagar era, but there's no denying they continued to have a lot of commercial appeal and influence with a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
Sammy Hagar era stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I'd be willing to make I would be willing to make and even hear an argument for Van Halen, but going back to Celtic Frost for just
Yeah.
the we got but just for a little
Uh,
moment.
like I just in terms of, well, influence, then I'd say I agree. Because again, a lot of death metal bands, a lot of black metal bands, Mayhem for sure, like, you know, and Enslaved, like I'm sure they've all cited Celtic Frost as like, say, like a at least a small influence. And especially Cannibal Corpse, like they started out, you know, before they even got on a label or even made a demo, they were starting out as, you know, covering Dethroned Emperor,
Mhm.
the song from Celtic Frost, among other Celtic Frost songs.
So are we
So
in agreement on Celtic Frost then?
I would say yes. Even
Wonderful.
even if I'm personally not a big fan, I can't like look at their impact and say, nah, fuck them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I'll save that for Slayer. Ha 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 ha. No, I'm
Ooh,
kidding. I'm
them's
kidding.
fighting
I'm
words.
kidding.
So, and in the process of discussing Celtic Frost, we also unironically might have made an argument for Van Halen. So, how do we feel about that?
So Van Halen. So hmm. I'm thinking, you
I'm
know,
game if you are, but if you're not game, then so be it.
yeah, like they had a huge influence on power metal as well, and pop metal and glam metal.
Glam
Like,
metal in the 80s.
oh yeah, for
I
sure. Like
mean,
it, like the more happy side of metal, like I think they had a huge influence on, and even the darker side of metal, like, you know, in terms of Eddie's guitar playing, like,
so you know
you know,
what? Let's go ahead and just throw them on.
yeah,
And if we find that people feel really strongly against it, maybe we'll reconsider in the future. But for now, that's pretty good. And that this is
yeah,
actually quite a few bands. This
oh
is
yeah,
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 bands currently on here.
oh
That's
yeah.
pretty fucking good.
That's
How do
actually pretty
we
fucking metal. 13 bands, you
hell
know,
yeah.
Friday the 13th and shit. But yeah,
Now I feel pretty good about this list.
yeah.
Um do we want to add a few more?
Hmm.
Because we didn't the mac we said minimum 10, maximum 20.
Yeah. Like I'm see, like if I were to add any more, I would like say add people in like the builders category sort of deal. So like, you know, people behind the scenes. So like, you know, record execs, producers. Like I'd think of Brian Slagel. I'd think of Scott Burns, Roger Bain, the guy who, you know, produced the
Okay.
first Black Sabbath albums. So if like, say we wanted to extend it a couple names, like I'd say we'd throw Brian Slagel's name on there because he got Metallica on one of his first Metal Massacre
And Metal
albums. And
Blade Records as a whole, I mean,
yeah,
that's duh.
Yeah.
I think I'm. You know what? I'm game. Let's throw
Yeah.
Brian Slagel and Metal Blade as a whole, I guess.
Yeah. Um,
So how
yeah.
would we feel about Pantera?
Pantera, very influential, very big in the 90s, especially. Like a lot of people will argue.
Arguably the 90s metal band.
Yeah. Like they were influential on new metal, whether they like
And
it or not. But
and whether I like it or not, and I don't like it, I think the Pantera reunion is stupid, and Vinnie Paul would not have liked it if he were alive, contrary to what Pantera fans would like to believe. The fact remains, the fact that that can even happen and the fact that they're selling out stadiums, Pantera remains very popular.
yeah.
Regardless of our opinions on the Pantera reunion, regardless of our opinions on Phil Anselmo and everyone else,
Yeah.
Pantera nonetheless remains an extremely influential and popular metal band.
Yeah. You know what? If like we're going maximum 20, yeah, throw Pantera on there for sure. Cause again, Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, Far Beyond Driven, that's an iconic trilogy.
Pantera, understood.
Yeah. Regardless of what I want to think about Phil Anselmo as a person, it's blah blah blah. Dimebag's guitar playing and Vinny's drumming is second to none. So yeah, and they were a big influence on what came after them, especially on new metal. Like you listen to Korn, Limp Bizkit, your favorite band of all time, of course.
Of course. I
yeah.
love it. My favorite part of every Limp Bizkit album is when they shut the fuck up.
Yeah, but like you listen to them and it's like, yeah, there's a little bit of Pantera in that. So like, yeah, I definitely would throw Pantera on
And
there.
it's like
sure.
when people talk about how metal died in the 90s, I'm like, but Pantera.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, yeah, Pantera. Like Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display, like these records were so massive. And the fact that Pantera went from being like a relative nobody in the 80s, like glam rock, glam metal, heavy metal scene, into being masters, icons of groove metal and 90s metal as a whole, it's insane. And the fact that Pantera remains so popular all these years later is testament to the quality of this music and to the impact that they had in the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. And R.I.P. Dimebag, R.I.P. Vinny as well. Like I do think Vinny was as good of a drummer as Dimebag was at guitar. Like they were brothers in terms of musicianship and in terms of literal definition of brother. But yeah, you're not going to hear any argument from me on Pantera. And I even like some of their old 80s glam albums, like power metal. So
we also briefly talked about Anthrax. Do we want to consider Anthrax at all for the big for this list as the only member of the big four that wouldn't be here? Or do we feel there's another thrash metal band or other extreme-ish metal band?
See, I would put Creator in before I put Anthrax in personally, because
and who I would put in before Creator? Sepultura.
Sepultura. Okay, I was close. It started with an S. I was going to say Sodom. No, no.
I like Creator too. Don't get me wrong, but I think Sepultura is interesting because they're another band that's so massive, and they've done everything. They've done thrash metal, they've done death metal, they've done groove metal. They brought in indigenous Brazilian music onto Roots and Against, and unintentionally played a role in the development of new metal. They've continued, despite the absence of Max Cavalera, contrary to what people would like to think, they've remained extremely popular and successful.
Oh yeah, when I saw them last year in Toronto,
they brought
with
the house
Derek
down, man.
Oh yeah, and he could fucking go. Derek Green could absolutely fucking go as a singer. So yeah, like he's had to eat a lot of shit, but he has taken it all on the chin and just kept doing his thing, which big respect. So yeah. I will argue, I do want to argue for Roots. That was a very divisive album when it came out. Very divisive. If internet existed, well, if social media was what it was at the time, you'd have so many hate videos on it for sure. But like I really dig that record, and it's one that like grows on me the more and more I listen to it. Like I think about, Roots Bloody Roots and the iconic, awesome track that is Rata Mahata. Like with
God,
that,
I love that fucking song.
so good. Yeah, they did so much interesting stuff with that record. So I will defend that one. I know it's a divisive record, but I will defend it to my grave. That's a really fucking strong album.
So let's go ahead and put on Sepultura then.
Yeah.
Because it does sound like we're in agreement there. Maybe not
sure.
Anthrax. We'll leave that up to the audience. So right now this gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 inductees for our first ever Heavy Metal Hall of Fame. Is there anyone and this list, might I add, includes currently Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Death, Ronnie James Dio, Alice Cooper, Megadeth, Slayer, Cannibal Corpse, Celtic Frost, Van Halen, Brian Slagel, Pantera, and Sepultura. Yeah. I feel good about this. I enjoy this list.
I will say, if we're going to add a record exec that was Brian Slagel, we got to add a producer too.
Do we want to throw on Scott Burns?
Abso-fucking-lutely.
Okay.
So in terms of death metal production, I know he wasn't the first guy to produce metal albums like Roger Bain was. I know he didn't produce,
but Roger Bain's not a household name.
Yeah.
Whereas Scott Burns, at least by metal standards, kind of is. Yeah. And what he is just as important to the sound of death metal. I mean, he's produced classics from Obituary, Morbid Angel, the aforementioned Sepultura, Napalm Death. Like, there are so many classic records that he produced. And Cannibal Corpse, for that matter. A lot of the classic Cannibal Corpse stuff. That's all him, baby.
Sure. Oh yeah. So I'm cool with those 18. I know we've left off a lot of black metal, so if our limit is 20. I'm gonna go quickly and throw Dark Throne and Mayhem on there.
I'm not feeling Dark Throne, but maybe Mayhem. Yeah. Maybe. Arguably the first true black metal band because of those early demos and EPs. The debut remains a landmark release in the genre. I might be biased with Dark Throne because I've just never been a fan. But I'm willing to hear out people's arguments if they have them.
Yeah.
I also would like to throw in one last minute name, Scorpions.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Right away. No need for debate. Scorpions.
Nope. Scorpions, yeah.
This is a band, much like Judas Priest, is kind of really great in laying down the foundational elements of metal. Yeah. And they just have so many great songs, so many great records. When I saw Scorpions live, I went because Megadeth was opening. This was like 2015, 16-ish. And I didn't really realize how many big hits Scorpions had until they started doing their set. Yeah. Like, it kind of blew my fucking mind. Oh, yeah. And they remain extremely popular, extremely consistent. There are a lot of people that still cite Scorpions as a big influence on hard rock and heavy metal music. And it sounds like we're in agreement.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Wonderful.
Especially in terms of, like, the Schenker brothers guitar playing. Like, Michael Schenker on Love Drive was just fucking awesome on that record. And of course, like, they have the big hits, Rock You Like a Hurricane, No One Like You, Big City Nights. Like, yeah, they were just almost just as impactful as, say, Priest and Maiden and Motorhead were in that, like, very short time period. But yeah.
We also mentioned Mayhem. I mean, controversy aside, I mean, black metal arguably doesn't exist without Mayhem.
Pretty much.
We can argue they're overrated. We can argue all this shit. But I mean, Mayhem is Mayhem.
Yeah.
And I don't feel bad. I don't feel as bad because Varg only played on like one fucking record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No Burzum, but we can live with no Burzum, but I can live with Mayhem.
Yeah, no, fuck Burzum.
Hell yeah, fuck Burzum.
Yeah.
Let's throw in Mayhem. And with that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 bands.
Nice.
Do we want to fill it out, or are we happy with 19?
Well, you know what? I'm going to throw this to you because I am shocked you did not mention this band because you love them so much, Napalm Death.
So I wanted to, but I wasn't sure I could make an argument that they were more important or more influential, or as influential as, well, Sepultura, Van Halen, especially not Metallica.
Yeah.
But since you brought them up, I also felt I might be biased by bringing them up, not going to lie. But since you brought them up, this is a great segue into the awesomeness that is Napalm Death, pioneers and arguably still masters of grindcore, known for some of the most abrasive, confrontational music ever made. They've continued to expand their horizons and experiment with shoegaze and post-metal and death metal. Their lyrics have gotten more progressive politically and socially. A lot of social messages, environmental messages. Napalm Death too. Like they're right up there with like Death and Cannibal Corpse as just being like poster boys for fucking extreme metal as a whole. So, I'm more than fucking game to throw Napalm Death up there.
You will not hear an argument from me.
Hell yeah, let's do it.
Just based on You Suffer alone, like you know me, I love some memes. I love me some memes, and that is one of the greatest memes of all time, right? So, yeah.
All right. So with that, the Metal Meltdown and Mad Mike's Heavy Metal Hall of Fame, the first class of inductees, which includes Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Death, Ronnie James Dio, Alice Cooper, Megadeth, Slayer, Cannibal Corpse, Celtic Frost, Van Halen, Brian Slagel, Pantera, Sepultura, Scott Burns, Scorpions, Mayhem, and Napalm Death. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 bands. I did not expect we'd get to 20. I figured we'd cap out just after 10.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy with that one if you are.
I'm very happy with this. This makes for an excellent first round of inductees, I would say.
Yeah, and I think this will generate a lot of discussion and your always extremely peaceful comment sections.
Always. Always. And folks, I'm game to hear arguments for other bands. Mike is game to hear other arguments. I mean, if this turns out to be a popular video, who knows? We could do a part 2. We could do a live stream discussing some bands and shit. I'm game. Let us know. Absolutely. But personally, right now, I like what we've done here. We've captured a little bit of everything. We've got the classic metal, thrash metal, black metal, death metal, grindcore. We've acknowledged influential figures behind the scenes as well. There are other genres we could definitely focus on more in the future. Like it wouldn't hurt to include some new metal or some melodic death metal in the future, some power metal, some prog metal. But overall, I feel like we did it.
Yeah.
I feel good with this.
Woohoo, yeah.
Do we have any last minute additions or subtractions?
I'm game with this one. Let's leave this up to the audience. Let's leave this up to the peaceful commenters down there, see what they think, and we'll go from there, man. But yeah, I'm happy with this list, and a lot of great fucking music, a lot of great people to check out there, and a lot of great influence. So,
and remember, folks, this isn't about who's your favorite band or whatever. This is about the most influential bands and artists and people of all time.
Yeah, if we were doing that, then I'd make the argument for Sumo Psycho to be on there.
I was so tempted to make a joke. I'm not gonna fucking. And that's also part of why I didn't want to mention Napalm Death, because I didn't want to seem biased. But since you brought him up, we're good.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm just joking, by the way. No Sumo Psycho, for God's sakes. Oh God. Let's leave this one to the floor, I think. So have him what do you guys think watching this video? Do you agree with this? Do you not? Discuss.
Let us know. Who would you add? Who would you take away? Did we get it wrong? Did we get it right? Did we get it somewhere in the middle? What bands would you like to see included in the future? If we were to do a second part, how would you like that to be done? Another big, long video like this? Or maybe would you prefer like a live stream kind of thing? I don't know. Let me know. It's something we could maybe do. All you got to do is ask nicely. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out Mad Mike's channel, Mad Mike. Also, Dem Boys, which he's also a part of. If you have not done so already, subscribe to mine if you haven't done so already. Check us both out on Discord, links to which will be in the description. And as always, y'all have yourself a fantastic fucking day.
Later.